Hello. On March 13th in 2004, I was again a featured poet in Wilmington. This time it was at the Franco's at 4W5, which is down in center of town, just off of Market Street. And a lot of these poems go back a number of years, actually pretty much back to my youth, although some of them were more recent. But these were the ones I did that night. Pretermitted insufflation. Here the grain, the grass, the field. There the woods, fence half concealed. Here more than can be possessed. Hidden treasure, rare revealed. The grains, gold, seem overrun. Buttery beams, melting sun. Caught in freshest summer breeze is the place where I have come to pluck watercress from a creek amid seedy mustard and green leek, feathering my life like a nest, listening to time hardly speak. Old Man in the Wind. It's a funny thing that you would think that when you're young you wouldn't give any consideration to age or death and those type of things. But it seems that when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I wrote a number of poems that deal with those subjects. This was one of them. So I can read it now that I am old. Called Old Man in the Wind. The wind came blowing each morning, sweeping down their lane, putting ridges across the front yard, and tearing the crops again. The stalks were withered in the cornfield. Her husband grown quite old. Their kitchen pantry was nearly empty, and still the wind blew cold. The wind went by, blowing free, just the way our old man used to be. He would come into town just passing through and never see the damage that he blew. At times the sea got angry and blew salt into the sky. These acrid grains left their car rusted, made all their willow trees die. At times it made them get thirsty, but the good waters get low. The cattle were all starving, and they were sinking slow. All night long the wind came and went. In through the cracks the chilling blow. All night long her husband's fever grew, until with dawn his breath began to slow. In the old man's room loomed silence. Now who can tend the sickly cattle? Not this wind that blows souls away. It leaves behind that battle. Up on the hillside in the backyard, cemetery, a new grave. It was hacked out with shovel and sweat. The fields at home are empty of life, but the wind is up there yet. Strictly from Hunger, a haiku. To be in hunger is as a tree in blossom. It pains to be full. Back in 60s, I wrote a biography, and I wrote to the person, and I carried on some correspondence over a period of a year with the man. His name was Stanley Stein. It was a pseudonym for his real name, and he suffered from Hansen's disease, which is better known as leprosy. It's a name that they would prefer to do away with because of the connotations that have built up around that name, the fears and such. And when he was a man with a family, a younger man, family and a business, he contacted Hansen's disease, and they locked him away in Carsville in Louisiana, I believe, which was a leper colony. Took away everything he had, including his name. He wrote a book in an effort to bring some reform and fairness to people who contact this disease. I felt somewhat akin because I have psoriasis, which if you read the Bible is lumped right in there with a lot of other skin diseases, including leprosy, and carried a certain stigma with it. So to Stanley Stein, you had me in a cave as to save from the grave you from my infection, because of a pale blemish that diminishes the finish of my complexion. I don't know why this land to a man wants to ban me, a tainted fixation. And don't call me that word anymore. You've given me swampland, barless prison blues. You won't allow me a wife or a life in the strife of my growing poverty. And you put me down the ground, away from town, under guard, lock, and key. Then you turn tail and run, and you shun me, and son, you call this democracy. And don't call me that word anymore, son. You've given me swampland, barless prison blues. And your preachers preach the gospel, and they turn the people rather hostile. Then they collect for the hospital. You call that Christianity. And every gift that you give me is sterilized just to rid me. While you say you want to live, gee, you do that unanimously. Then you wash your hands off after waving me to please stand off. After you burned all the land off, you leave me anonymously. While you go back home with your own all alone, whispering where you've been. Then you gasp at the rot at the spot and allow how we aren't owning much skin. After which you sit back and get slack with a snack and go back asleep again. And don't call me that word anymore. You've given me swampland, barless prison blues. A number of poems that are in this set are two classic poetry form. This is one of them called Rhyme Royal, which is a form. Rhyme Royal to Jazz. Alone at evening dusk, myself and jazz, our chords both soft and sad. Alone we test the scale for new expression. Our impasse, imagination fails. Our notes but jest. The mind of man is not up to the test. How terrible are these limits of mind that at the end of thought our actions bind. Borders, not the bookstores. Measuring the borders of my life, I count a war at every end. My infancy in the year of infamy, when flames had burned Poland, Norway, Czechoslovakia, Greece, and France. A child born to bursting bombs and Tojo, a war bordering my birth. And now, many year dates later, a war bordering my present adulthood. My moments ticked in hand grenade seconds. My minutes boomed by dropping bombs. Boundaries between the world and I. God cursed the bloody borders of my life while I join men continuing their crimes. Call it something like a war. Love song without lyric. I love you, though I never say it. In saying it, you lose the substance. Can you say ocean and touch what you mean? Does the word express sea depth and strength? Does it crash like white wave or dart like a fish? Do you feel the moon tug in voicing the word? Can you sift the sand or breathe the salt spray in speaking the sound? Do you lose the feel of life, of strength, of mystery? To say ocean is to say nothing. To say I love you is but little more. All right, some political stuff. Both parties, non-partisan here. This one was written earlier. The next part of it was written later. And it's called Walk by the White Water Gate. Same old lessons from history. Then, you could not see a plane because no plane was fueled to fly. No cars were driving on the road. There was no gas to buy. The walrus and the carpenter, the latter had a state. They wept like anything to see the fruits of Watergate. "I'll not wallow in this mess," said one. "Don't," said his mate. "If senators with 7 tapes searched for all the year, do you suppose," asked Carpenter, "that we could get off clear?" "I doubt it, boss," said the walrus, and shed a bitter tear. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile ahead, when inspiration came. "Sir, there's something you should know," the walrus said. "I wish to stay, but I think that I should go." The carpenter was all alone as the oceans roared, and the timid tiny oysters formed an inquiry board. So he called a lobster to his side. 'Twas the best he could afford. "Oh, woeful weeping carpenter, your tears are all a sham. Why don't you do like Walrus did and take it on the lam? Too late to shut the water gate or the bursting dam." "The time has come," said Carpenter, "to talk of many things, of China and of income tax, of prisoners and kings, and what Dayton is or is not, and does Kissinger have wings?" "Now wait a minute," the oysters cried, "before going on with that. We think that's just a cover-up, like your paper hat. And if you don't come clean, we're going to toss you out." "Toss me out," said the carpenter. "Don't you realize the tales that you've been told are only lobster lies and exaggerations made up by newspaper spies? First they kicked my dog about, and then my walrus friend. It's a left-wing conspiracy to bring me to an end, and if you don't cease right now, I shan't speak to you again." Walk by the white water gate. Same old lessons from history. Later. Just when the water seemed safe, here came a strange new twosome. Dancing in perfect harmony was Hilly Dee and Billy Dum. They pranced about with deeds undone and left behind words designed to numb. "The time has come," said Dee and Dum, "to talk of many things, of China and of income tax, of cancel and kings, and what intercourse is and is not, and does Monica have wings?" "Stars come out," said Dum and Dee, "but don't you realize the tales you've been told are only lobster lies and exaggerations made up by newspaper spies? We read your case, long gone carpenter, and we mean you no malice, but it's a right-wing conspiracy that surrounds this palace. Don't tell the talking heads, but I've been dating Alice." "What's that you said?" asked Hilly Dee. "Would you risk us being jailed?" "Now never fret, my faithful pet. You know I've never failed. I've blown smoke about adultery, but I've ne'er inhaled." Back to school. A pantoum is another form that follows a certain pattern and repeating rhymes. It is the end of August, when children return to school, and we long for noisome lust as the autumn days grow cool. When children return to school, there is time for us once more, as autumn days grow cool, to steal afternoon amore. There is time for us once more, with passion's full violence, to steal afternoon amore, with no restraint for silence. With passion's full violence, we still wait and stew and foam. With no restraint or silence, our grown children still are home. We still wait and stew and foam. It is the end of August, our grown children still are home, and we long for noisome lust. All right, we have many groups around, and they all have their idea of what brotherhood is. They get together and we have rousing songs of brotherhood. But we go out and we look at the world and we have to question how much brotherhood we see. This is called Songs of Brotherhood, a ballad. not a ballad, which is another form. On a 1776 night, Paul Revere saddled his horse and did ride, to warn his mates of coming British might. This was at great risk to career and hide. Still he showed courage as the warnings he cried. He offered up his life and all he could, but not gentry born, he was pushed aside. Another rousing song of brotherhood. Sing one more uplifting spirited song, back it with drums and the waving of flags. Then get a rope and tie knots tight and strong. Start the truck and see if it holds and drags the dark man into pieces, bits and rags. And just so we are not misunderstood, let us go beat and brutalize some fags. Another rousing song of brotherhood. Are you, my brothers, sitting here tonight, sharing the poet's muses and mysteries? We're different in more than weight and height, in sex, skin, and family histories. Don't you think all of our varieties are why, through time, it's the artist who stood against the prejudice of tyrannies? Another rousing song of brotherhood. Some would use brotherhood as an excuse to fight, the rainbow for the storm cloud if they could, the dim, the blend of color that creates light. Another rousing song of brotherhood. Middle, an occurrence on French Street in Wilmington. This is a true story. This happened during a time when my middle child, my second daughter, Noelle, was serving a deployment in Iraq. This was the first deployment when we went in against Saddam Hussein. I was out just walking around Wilmington, taking photographs of different buildings and such as sort of my hobby. And this poem explains exactly what happened. Dotting the vista of brick, the branding islands of green canvas awnings claiming our street, and I, a camera, stand upon the middle, snapping a memory of freedom. A street in America that my taxes helped to pave, all framed neatly in my lens, when a tapping interrupted my snapping. Behind me, a uniform badge reading security questions my citizenry. What am I doing? For whom? Am I a tourist in town taking pictures of this street? For my daughter in Iraq, a soldier far from home. I make no explanation. Silent here in the middle, pondering on a riddle. Why is it my prodigy is asked to risk her hide to carry America's version of democracy to a land in the middle of disarray and terror, if we can't walk without fear of the Patriotic Act trumping the Constitution? Is the guardian in our midst truly our new terrorist? Still I snap my photograph. He talks to his radio. I wander to the corner. Blocks away flash police lights, and in a courtyard on King stands a bold shining statue. Words in metal for all to gaze. The title across the top plainly says, Our Bill of Rights. I take no picture here lest I invite my own arrest, and walk instead into uncertainty. On the road of myself. Do you know whom I saw today? Myself down an ancient country road. A 12-year-old looking around the curve. I didn't know whether to lead or follow, for I knew the road all too well. I knew every loose and tripping stone, every broken, jarring pothole, every rut and hill to its destination. I could show where the mudslides were, where the high grass hit the carnivores. I knew the distances from day to night, the long-lasting stretches of exposure, the asylum of sheltering sites, waterholes of sanctuary, where gathered each fellow journeyman on this over-traveled road to desperation. I met myself when I was young and decided that I would follow the boy I was once not the man he is. I promise not to cry out directions when he takes a different turn. I'll be silent at each mistake and embrace the unknown path taken and look ahead in joyful anticipation. I knew a woman once. Her name was Amanda. She was an aspiring poet, but she didn't have a lot of, faith in her poetry. But her poetry was quite good. And she did go on and become a poet. She even got her picture and lines or so about her in Delaware Today magazine. And I haven't seen her for quite a while now. I don't know if she's still doing her poetry. I hope she is. But I wrote this for her. It was published a couple of years, back in 2004 now, in the magazine Wanderings. It's called Poet Emerging. Amanda, sitting serene by the shore, lapping over grains of words, sifting through the syllables, chipping out the pick of shells, which lane end to end shine, which held ear to ear chime, and which reflected upon reveal ripples and currents in the depths of the ocean. Amanda. Sorcery Seduction was published in, it was called Writer's Journal out of New England. It's a vanilla, a villanella is another form, somewhat popular form of poetry. A simple soft fusion can add season and spice, like a vegetable garden garnered on the side, where tangy cream sauce is surprisingly nice. Perhaps enhanced by a fine heady wine and ice, to convince that covert recipes should be tried. A little soft fusion can add season and spice. Risque flavors add zest to our risotto rice. Enthused together with imagination our guide, where a tangy cream sauce is surprisingly nice. To relish tasting freshly plucked fruit is no vice. One gets tired of raisins, prunes, and figs that have dried. A little soft fusion can add season and spice. Enjoy this aromatic dish and don't think twice. Cascade it across your salad and give it a ride, where a tangy cream sauce is surprisingly nice. Doesn't that saucy recipe really entice you to savor, to taste, to saturate, imbibe? A little soft fusion can add season and spice, where a tangy cream sauce is surprisingly nice. Make of it what you will. Sorcery, a gazelle. This is sort of actually a Arabian, I believe, form of poetry. It has certain set rules, including having to include your name in the final line. Small amber embers bloom in smoky swirls, some lingering in the air. I travel in a smoke ring. Trickery and sleight of hand transport me like moonbeam through a charmed mystery. I travel. What a smoke ring so wispy thin and tenuous beneath my feet. Directed by magic I travel on. A smoke ring of enchantment has embraced my fantasy. In shimmeriamic seas I travel. What a smoke ring, a grey puff of phantasmagoric artifice. Can this truly be I? Travel in a smoke ring can be but sorcery, illusion, or deception. It's a wicked witchcraft I travel on. A smoke ring conjuring potent prodigitation has charmed Larry Meredith, and I travel in a smoke ring. And in case you're wondering, no, I never smoked dope. In the city of change, literature of life was burned on trains, poetry to the beat of the rail seam. In the trickle of rain, the rising steam rhythms from summer heat, crackles of ice off cold station gutters under strains from winter snow piled deep upon the roof. These teaching me all the beauty and pain nature sows, from which reap pleasure and vice. In my life of change, in a time of change, the streets were colorful as flowers bloomed. Posters swirled and glowed, while new music boomed with meaning, with cause, cool, but laced with care, accepting all the people in full rage against the bloody pool of war and hate. And I struggled to paint upon the page each hero and each fool I met while there. In the park, and the dark passing shadows change with the changing hour and the seasons. In ragged second store dress, stocking runs, bell-bottom denim, dour pea jacket green. The men who love men, druggies on their prowls, hippie girls with flowers in their tresses, poets and writers and actors and pals, adding to the bowers where my words grew. Changes came into the city of change. The nightlife shifted streets, head shops went dark, psychedelic posters dimmed to new art. As hippies came from beats, they went to goths. Rittenhouse Square is where now old men range. They occupy the seats and sing those songs. So though I trod old walks and find them strange, memories glow and treats their tales like moths that I attempt to change back to butterflies. Thank you.